Here with a couple of people to talk about the PayPal misinformation fine. Two people who I think are going to be able to give us some great perspective on this. Jeffrey Tucker is the president of Brownstone Institute, and then Christina writes under the pen name Radix Verum on Substack. She's also on YouTube and on Locals. Does a lot of national security and surveillance type stuff, and she is one of the collateral damage victims of PayPal's policies, which is why I wanted to have her on as well to talk about this issue, because everybody's kind of freaking out, you guys, that PayPal, had this error released over the weekend, or I guess late last week, talking about how they're going to fine you $2,500 for misinformation, then retracted, saying like it was an error, kind of like the interns who, I don't know if you remember when the interns wrote the names of the pilots that landed the plane in San Francisco. Do you remember that? You guys, you didn't see, there was an Asiana flight. An Asiana flight from, I can't remember where, somewhere in Asia. That's where the Asiana flight came from. Anyway, and they blamed it on the intern, though I'm not quite sure if that's really what happened. But this TV station actually ran with the names Something Wong, Holy Fook, like that. They actually wrote that and then read it, and then blamed this intern. But the news stations never even questioned the names when they just read them out. Anyway, it was a total fiasco. Now you have PayPal blaming who knows, but they say this came out and it was an error on their part. But Christina was booted from PayPal, so we know they take action based on what you're doing for your business. It may not even be something you're using PayPal for, but they'll come after you, kind of like Patreon came after Whitney Webb for something she was writing on her own website. So it's not, I don't think, like a unique phenomenon. I have a lot of questions about it, but Jeffrey, I was wondering, since you wrote this article for the Epoch Times, the PayPal fiasco is no accident. Why don't you just kind of give us the background and then we'll dive into it?
Well, the deep background is that PayPal was established to be an independent, uncensorable form of money transfer, and eventually a money. That was what Peter Thiel had imagined it to be, together with Elon Musk. This is before Bitcoin, solved the problems of peer-to-peer payments. So they wanted to be the next internet money. Well, fast forward a lot of years. And now PayPal is facing a real institutional crisis, which is whether to be loyal to its customer base or to this sort of, for lack of a better term, ruling class agenda of surveillance, compliance, and using people's finances to assure political allegiance and loyalty and manipulation. So, and as we all know, that over the last year and a half, even 2 years, the sort of agenda of the mighty has begun to prevail over the customers, and indeed that was happened about 10 days ago when my good friends in London with Daily Skeptic and Free Speech Union were deplatformed or just disconnected from PayPal completely. It was a major source of their donations. These are donation-based organizations, and suddenly they found themselves unplugged. And there was screaming all over Twitter, and everybody was going nuts. And then PayPal relented, made their accounts live again without explanation, of course, which is alarming in itself, because you shouldn't have to have a Twitter mob screaming for people to have basic services, from financial companies. Well, it turned out about that time they were planning to release new terms of use, or what's called, there's another word for it. They use like agreements, whatever. They released it about 10 days after it was drafted. We know this from metadata, and it included the announcement that they can delete your account and charge you $2,500 per violation of their policy on misinformation, which we know, I hope, if we're sophisticated human beings on the planet Earth today, misinformation is a highly loaded term. It means political compliance with whatever the ruling orthodoxy happens to be, which means that everybody's subject to this. Well, there was a big outrage, and then Twitter, came out and said, "Oh, we didn't mean to say that. That's just a complete mistake. That was, for lack of a better term, misinformation." So is reverted, and now all the fact checkers are busy telling you that you can't say that PayPal was going to fine people for misinformation because that was just a mistake, and they
Right.
so and so on it goes. But my theory, and I wrote it in this article, which is oddly gotten a lot of attention. I'm grateful for that. Is that this was, as they say in the old days, a cloud no bigger than a man's hand. It was a foreshadowing of what's coming with central bank digital currencies, which is the use of financial system to achieve political loyalties and censorship, essentially.
Yeah.
So, Christina, maybe let's back up for a second. When you were banned from PayPal, we did a video about it, but could you just take us back and tell us what they told you? Like, what was, because this was what we did the video like a month ago, I think, or more.
Yeah.
A month ago.
It was like literally the day after I had interviewed Brandon Caserta, and they said that they flagged it for like some kind of fraudulent activity, but they don't tell you what that activity is. It's like a non-reason, and then there's no one that like responds to you and tells you like what happened or what specifically you did that was fraudulent, or how you like broke their rules. They don't tell you. And they just tell you that you can never do business with them again.
Somebody was telling us in the chat that they had gone over gun shops before, and so I just happened to do a quick search while you were talking. Violation leads to PayPal suspending Bud's gun shop account. This is from 2018.
Yeah,
but they say this is kind of the same thing. An unspecified violation is what. So you don't ever get to find out what
Right.
gets you banned from PayPal, and it's very similar, I think, to the policies of a lot of these big tech platforms. At least on YouTube, for instance, they don't really tell you specifically, and it's hard to reach anybody.
Yeah. Well, and this is sort of the way authoritarianism is supposed to work. It's not supposed to be consistent. It's just supposed to terrify you with its arbitrariness.
Exactly.
That's the thing, and all authoritarian regimes know this. The idea is not to announce a general rule for everybody and expect 100% compliance. The point is to have a vague rule and then variously, randomly take people down to terrify the whole population, and by that means you sort of bring about a general compliance. And it's very interesting, Christine, to hear your story, because I guess when I wrote my article, I hadn't really realized the extent to which this has already been happening, which raises a very interesting prospect in my mind, that this release of the new terms of use here was a codification of a policy that was already in place. In other words, there's a truthful statement. And so that the mistake was admitting the truth that they're already practicing that.
Yeah. Like, I think, one possible option was that there was a legal team somewhere that said, you should probably put this in writing, because you're starting to get some attention. There's this troublemaker named Christina, and she's been on this other troublemaker named Allison's channel. And people are starting to find out that you do this kind of stuff, because basically they steal your money. They tell you that, they're going to give it back, but they never do. Christina's not the only one I've had on my podcast who's had their account banned by PayPal and then never sees any of the remaining balance in it. So yeah, maybe there was a lawyer somewhere that was like, you should probably put this in writing since you're doing it anyway. And then everybody found out about it and freaked. I don't know.
The metadata, which you can get on the Wayback Machine, you can download the original PDF, has a name of a guy there as the author, and I kind of got overly curious. I looked it up, and I'm pretty sure it's the same guy. I can't know for sure, but there's a guy who works at DocuSign that actually was the one who prepared the document, which means that Twitter is using DocuSign. And that would make sense, right? Because they have to send it to all of these probably still remote employees, HR, teams of lawyers, mid-level managers, high-level guys, the CEO. And so it was clearly signed off on by everybody. And yes, there are very long documents and not everybody reads them. But actually, if you're going to change something as fundamental as that, you're going to highlight the changes so that people can approve them. So it's just silly for them to, flat out lie and say, oh, that was a mistake. We didn't mean to do that. Of course they meant to do that. That's exactly. The problem was it became a business disaster for them. Their stock, I haven't checked it today, but Yesterday was down 6%. Today before 5%. It was really bad. And then so here's the other thing I hadn't really thought about until this morning. Not only are people canceling their accounts, but people are draining their money from their PayPal balances, right? So people use PayPal in different ways, right? Some of them use it as a payment system to interface with their own bank. Some people use it as their bank. Well, if you have a sense that this company is going to suddenly tax you, you're going to run on the bank. So it might be actually a really important case of a run on a digital bank, maybe the first one we've seen in modern history. So it becomes a disaster. And this essential problem that all digital corporations and media places face right now, like, who do we choose, our customers or the ruling class, right? Who are we serving here, becomes a serious problem for this company, because they're losing valuations, they're losing customers, they're losing bank balances. At the same time, they're trying to comply with, I guess you would call it regime priorities.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, in your article, you talk a little bit about how it's tragic because PayPal was set up initially as a means of obtaining financial independence from government-controlled banks. And then make the argument that they showed their hand and revealed a much deeper and scarier plan that relates to the Biden administration's intention to create a new central bank digital currency. This will be programmable money, one that would allow ruling elite to cut off your means to live if they so choose. Can we talk a little bit about that?
You just have to slightly go back and recognize that fundamental monetary reform is baked into the history of the last 200 years. In 1880 we had the institution of a gold standard, and I'm just talking about the U.S. case. In 1913 we got the central bank. Then we had suspension of gold payments with World War I to enable vast money printing to fund that catastrophe. And then as soon as FDR took office in 1933, he brought about gold confiscation of the population, closed all the banks, and redefined the dollar in terms of 1/35 an ounce of gold. And then after World War II, we got the Bretton Woods system of the gold, and then we had 1974 with the institution of the global fiat exchange rates and so on. So periodically there's these big upheavals in monetary reform, and I'm telling you, the next one that is in line to happen is going to be to blockchain the dollar and put it on a private blockchain controlled by the U.S. Treasury Department, with interfacing with the Federal Reserve. And that would essentially, and you drive the entire population to that mechanism of exchange. Now you've got a currency that's completely consistent with universal surveillance, and the bringing about of a China-style social credit system, since the same blockchain, if the blocks are big enough, can include all your social media stuff, your political allegiances, your political contributions, your health records, vaccination status, you name it, everything can be on there. So this is a step towards massive dystopia. And everybody last year was merely speculated about it, like, oh, conspiracy theorists. And then in March, the Biden administration came out with an executive order saying, oh, we have to study this, look into it, and do it as soon as possible. So this is coming. It's on the agenda. I don't know if it's going to take a year, 5 years, 10 years, but that's the ambition.
Christina, do you have anything you want to add on that point?
Yeah, I totally agree. I do think it's very similar to the Chinese social credit system, Sesame Credit. We've already seen things like this happening to people here, journalists, people like Laura Loomer, who's even running for Congress. She's banned from Uber. She's banned from what's the other thing called? Where you can rent a house or something, Airbnb, right? Like all these different places. And it's all centralizing control in the hands of these corporations, and then using corporations to punish political dissidents. So it's not the government doing it, but technically it is, right? And I know you and I were talking about this with these social media companies the other day, that they're ostensibly private companies, but when you look into them, like Google has its origins in a joint CIA-NSA research grant. How private are they really? And then you look at In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital firm in Silicon Valley that is funding all of these different tech companies, biotech companies. And it's just really like disturbing. Like, where's the line end there between like the federal government and these big bureaucracies and then these private companies?
That's right.
It's disturbing. And I
It's
know that
very
China is very
disturbing.
similar. They have state-owned enterprises, and they have basically the Chinese Communist Party controlling these companies in the background.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a serious matter. Where the founding fathers set up, or the framers of the Constitution set up a system, you know, with the Bill of Rights that restricted the government. Okay, so then 200 whatever years later, 240 years later, it's like, well, wait a minute. We're too restrained. This First Amendment is really annoying. How do we control the population? Well, I know. Let's just do it by leaning on the large corporations that everybody uses for their information, and get them to do the thing we want to do, but we can't do because the courts would ding us and stop it. But we can through a very careful relationships between the administrative apparatus of the federal government and these large corporations. We can bring about exactly what we want in violation of certainly the spirit of the Constitution. This is all going to be tested in court, and I hope we can make some progress. There are a lot of lawsuits out there right now, but you can't. I mean, this is supposed to be a country of rights and freedoms and liberty and free speech and that kind of stuff, right? And it doesn't, you know, you can't have the government just outsourcing its despotic ambitions to corporations and saying that it's all fine. That doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm curious, when you all are thinking about it, what would be, if there is a better case scenario, what would be a better case scenario? Just being open, that this, like having a system where, for instance, the government openly owns and controls your media, for instance, like in a country, or the system we have, which is like pretend. what would be better, I guess?
That's a really tough. I don't know. That's a really challenging question. I mean, the answer would seem to be obvious, but it's not so obvious, actually. I mean, I'm not so sure anymore. I mean, this has really challenged a lot of ideological priors. I mean, I come from a kind of a heritage of, you know, sort of a binary-based libertarianism. Private sector is good, the government's bad. But these days, it's not so clear which is the hand and which is the glove. That's where it gets strange.
Yeah, it truly is. And I mean, it kind of seems like the illusion of separation, or like the illusion of like democracy, right? That's how I see it now. And I wonder which one is more insidious, because I do know that like under the Soviet Union, everybody knew like that they were being lied to. They knew that they were living under tyranny. And here I worry about how many people are actually aware of like all of these things going on in the background. You know, in the Biden administration was telling Facebook to censor people.
Yeah.
This is not like a new thing, you know, the government telling these social media companies what to do, and the extent that there is separation. I mean, I've read about a lot of former FBI people working at Twitter, for example,
Right.
And it just raises a lot of questions about like privacy and, you know,
Well,
there's so much, you know.
And there's even more disturbing. These companies volunteered. Remember, like during lockdowns, they all just immediately wrote to the CDC and NIH and said, "Hey, what can we do to promote your weird lockdown thing and masking and, you know, God knows what?" And they were ready to go. They couldn't wait for a mission and a purpose. And so I don't know who's intimidating who. You know, I don't really know. I mean, it's all. I mean, we know that the more we look at the fiasco of the last 2.5 years, the more we see strange private sector interests behind a lot of it. You know, like who benefited from the closure of all the businesses? Amazon certainly did. Who owns the Washington Post? Well, Jeff Bezos, right? And who, you know, Washington Post has advocated for lockdowns. Or look at the relationship between the pharmaceutical companies and the mandates. That's a great scam, right? I mean, you come up with a product which you use taxpayer money to to come up with, people don't really want it. And so then you go to the government and say, how about this? You make everybody take our product.
Yeah, and give us immunity from liability too while you're at it.
Right. So, I mean, the power of the pharmaceutical companies, and now we're in the weird situation where the FDA can't even say no to them. You know, right? I mean, like, oh, here's our new booster tested on 3 rats or whatever. And they're like, okay, well, that's got to be a good thing. Wait, sorry.
Come on. It's not that bad.
Yeah, in these public-private partnerships.
Right.
What is a public-private partnership, you know? Why is that a good thing? Why do we need that? I think that there's already enough of that happening in the background anyways, with these multinational corporations partnering with the federal government. And it just gets really scary, especially with the elections. You know, I know that because of the platform we're on, I can't really say too much about this, but we've seen these companies, you know, working with the government to censor information they don't like. And, you know, the implications of that are pretty crazy.
And you know what's even worse about it? The New Deal had a lot of these things, right? Like, government's going to pay a big tractor company to dig a hole in the city center, which is going to become a swimming place for people, or make a dam or a bridge. Okay, that maybe that's corrupt. I don't know, but at least it didn't interfere fundamentally with our rights and liberties. We were talking about digital media and our personal data, which for the last 20 years we've volunteered to all these companies, thinking that we could trust them, and now they're selling it to the government and using it for a political purpose. This is truly terrifying. This is not the Hoover Dam, right? This is our lives we're talking about here.
Yes.
Okay, Jeffrey, in a second, I wanted to ask you too about the part of your article where you discuss the coverage by the Washington Post and the sort of the signaling of political dichotomies, and how it's like really not that bad because it was just a right-wing thing, and they always ruin it for everything. But first, I had to run out because the producer came in asking for milk. What she really meant was you should go to Allison Wine Promo. She's not drinking wine. I swear she's only 2. So we do have some rules here. But anyway, if you want to support my work and have more people like Jeffrey and Christina on, go to AllisonWinePromo.com and get 50% off my favorite Malbecs from Argentina and 50% off shipping. These help keep me in business, and they're also just great wines. Now that I am 3 weeks postpartum, I can also toast to free speech with you. So again, 50% off the wine itself and 50% off shipping. They're really, really good wines. And as we're transitioning into fall, you're probably getting depressed about winter. A great way to feel better about it is just have a great glass of wine. Come on, that's what everybody does. So go there, or you can go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. You get 10% off your first order. These are organic roasts from Nicaragua. There's a light roast, there's dark roast, there's also a Caturra tea. If you're a tea drinker, you can do that. I really like the Caturra tea. It's tea you make from the coffee fruit. I make kombucha out of it. It tastes a lot like black tea. You can add a little monk fruit sweetener, some lemon. I cold brew mine, even in the wintertime. I'm a cold brew person. So anyway, thanks for checking out my sponsors. Let's go back to Jeffrey's article real fast. And I'll take down my twin engine coffee. Okay, so yeah, here's one graph here. Did you catch that? The Post is careful to note that the protests were from conservative outlets and that it sparked uproar online on the right. And I think you're so spot on to point this out, because it's something I talk about all the time. It happened under COVID quite a bit with like vaccine mandates or the vaccines themselves. Lockdowns. It always seemed like whenever the dissent was reported on, it had this political undertone, like right-wing extremists are talking about this, so that it's almost like when people ask if somebody dies, like, well, were they a smoker or did they wear their seatbelt or whatever? Like, because you know what I mean? If you can put them in a category where they didn't behave like you, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Like, oh, well, I wear my seatbelt or I don't smoke, so I don't have to worry about lung cancer. And this is like the same thing. Like, oh, I'm not a right-wing extremist, so I don't have to worry about PayPal banning me. I would love for you to talk a little bit about this too. And Christina knows all about this, so you can jump in as well. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was such a good point.
Well, right. Well, you have to, when you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, you have to have your decoder ring on anyway. I mean, because they're written for a certain audience. They know what that audience is, and they all regard the people they call conservatives or the people they call the right as not their people, right? So when they say that, what they mean is the other, right? So when they point out that there was protests among conservatives or the right wing, what they mean to say is that, first of all, you, our dear readers, should probably favor this policy if you don't want to be like them. That's one thing.
They were just trying to help you. Yeah, and just ruined it for all of us.
Yeah. And the other thing is to suggest that the people who are being censored are the people we really don't want to have a voice anyway. So that was the Washington Post speaking, which I find despicable, because you've got this sort of heritage of moderate, what they used to call liberalism in this country, that was sort of embedded in the Washington Post and the New York Times. And part of that was a belief in democracy and freedom and human rights and that sort of thing. Not always consistently applied, but generally there's a bias towards believing in, for example, free speech. But now you see this huge shift among the center left. So you've got pro-censorship ideology being it's very subtly and carefully advocated every day in news stories in both venues.
Yeah.
Christina, anything?
Democracy dies in darkness, right? And it is sad, because there was good journalism coming out of those outlets not that long ago. Like in the 80s and stuff, they still did some good work. But now it's just become total yellow journalism. It's propaganda, in my opinion. And, as he's saying, like, they're framing all of this stuff, we're taking away your rights, but we have to keep you safe from those dangerous extremists, So really, it's a good thing. And you should be on board with this. And I think it's very dehumanizing, and I think that they're setting people up for political violence, to say it's okay for anything to happen to those people, because they're not even real human beings. I think that's so sad.
Yeah, it got really bad during the pandemic, because once these venues decided to demonize, well, it was all about Trump in the end. But once for example, the New York Times discovered that there was less vaccine acceptance in red states, they wrote a big story about this, and the Biden administration picked it up immediately and started going on about the pandemic of the unvaccinated, and encouraging, anger and public fury against people who didn't want to take their shot, which was unbelievably divisive and shocking, and also not even true, because it, turns out state by state that might be true, but in terms of demographics, it was actually the people who were far less accepting of shots than anybody else tended historically to be the voters of the Democratic Party. So that's how brutal this whole thing has become. It's divisive and undemocratic and inconsistent with any conception of human dignity and universal human rights.
Was it U.S. only? There were a couple of questions from people about whether this was a U.S. policy only.
Oh, I don't know the answer. I don't actually know the answer to that. I think it was, but of course, my friends I was talking about who got deplatformed, got deleted by PayPal and then reinstated on public protests, were all in the UK.
Yeah.
So,
codifying it maybe only for the U.S. I don't know. Yeah, you were talking about your friends who got booted. And one of the things you also write in your article, which I think was spot on, is how it's ridiculous to keep fighting these battles by waging war on Twitter. I mean, it's such an insane way to have society. And that's what I have to do. I mean, that's really one of the only reasons I have Twitter, other than just to find people to invite on this podcast, is to just go on Twitter whenever YouTube suspends me and rage on them so that I can get my channel back. I mean, that's like that, but that's such an insane way to do business. Who wants to do business that way? Not me.
Also, it discriminates against people who work with their hands and are out there with like actual jobs. They're not sitting around on Zoom all day, much less don't have Twitter accounts. Not everybody has a Twitter account. Even those with Twitter accounts, they don't have large followings. So in other words, you have to be like famous or have a following or something even to get your rights. I mean, what the hell kind of world is that?
Yeah.
That's just outrageous.
Yeah, because it's basically, even if you win, I remember writing this like a year ago when I was suspended and reinstated for the first time. There's no celebration, in my opinion, of having the friendships that I do with people who make YouTube uncomfortable enough, because not many people have that. And so it still just sets up kind of an oligarchy. Even though Twitter makes you think like, oh, I can go to Twitter and have a voice, but not really, because if I had just been me and maybe like Christina tweeting them, we still wouldn't have gotten my channel back. But because I know people who have 500,000, a million subscribers, then they can make YouTube more uncomfortable. But I don't like that. That's not a celebration.
And it's not enough just to join Twitter. I mean, Twitter's hard. I mean, to get following, and it takes years, and you don't know what to tweet, and you can sit there and feel like a ghost town for years without. So it's not enough just to get a Twitter account, then you can have your rights. No, you've got to be connected. You've got to have friends, like you said, Allison.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and look what happened with Nick Rekieta. He had a massive channel, a 500,000 subscribers, and there are certain people that organize these brigades and target people to take them down. And I think the only reason he got reinstated was because so many people made a fuss about it on Twitter. But there are other channels that don't have that many subscribers or whatever. There's these small channels that don't have that ability to, when they do this, kind of have people come together and like make a big deal out of it. And so it's just really sad. I mean,
and there's other ways in which we censor ourselves for fear of getting blocked. I tell you, the Brownstone Institute has a YouTube channel. It has just a fraction of the videos that I make on there because we got dinged one time. I was like, that's too bad. So I tried to comply, and then for whatever reason, we got dinged again. Well, it turns out they have a 3 strikes you're out policy. Okay, so I'm sitting on 2 strikes. What am I going to do now? Right? I mean, I make one mistake and the whole channel's blown away. So I don't even use it really. I just preserve it. And anybody goes to the YouTube and goes, well, I guess Brownstone's not putting out many videos, or I don't know what people think, but here I'm censoring myself from that entire venue for fear of that 3rd strike, and and I don't even know why they're giving strikes. I mean, it's not clear to me.
No, it's not clear at all. There's no real policy. Anytime I've gotten a strike, they've never told me it was this exact thing that you said that violated this policy. You never know. And they're arbitrary. Like you said in the beginning of this, YouTube constantly changes and updates their terms of service and community guidelines, and then they'll go back and apply it to your old videos. So I have had strikes on something that I posted 2 years ago. I'll get a strike now for old content, and I'm like, what? But it was fine when I posted it 2 years ago. So I have gone back and I have deleted tons of old stuff on my channel because I know if I get one more strike, I'm out of here. And then what I will do is I'll make videos and I'll upload them to ODYSEE or Shing or something. And then I'll just do a video saying, hey, I made this video. Go watch it over here on this other platform. And it's just the fact that we have to do this stuff and dance around is just so silly.
And they can get you for spam to doing that. I've interviewed people who so just so you know, if you just use them, they don't want you to use them to advertise other websites. So they'll come after you for spam.
It's so sad the way we're talking, and just the fact that we're having to have this conversation. It was only 10 years ago the hope was still alive. The dream was still there. The internet is the place of freedom. It was going to, usher in a world of universal knowledge and communication and human rights, and all the tech companies were on our side. And I wrote whole books about this. I'm so embarrassed about that now. We've been betrayed. We really have been. That's where we are.
Yeah.
So what should people do? That's one of the questions over on my locals community. If you're not there, go to allisonmorrow.locals.com and join my editorial board. We have editorial board meetings on Saturdays, and then you can post questions ahead of time for interviews. So the question is there any damages shareholders can do, is there any damages shareholders can do to PayPal that would force PayPal to change its course and outcome as a company? I truly do not think the shareholders realize the full power of their influence within the operations of a company. I mean, other than just canceling your account, I guess that would be.
Well, this is, I'm not too optimistic it's going to work, but it does seem like a viable strategy. And certainly it worked in the case of PayPal. They got terrified. And I don't know, this seems like a very viable path. And then there's the other one of trying to figure out, alternatives. But the truth of the market is the reason why PayPal is as big as it is because it has the most workable technology. It's not so easy to build things like that. You can't just say, well, I'll start my own PayPal. Well, there's compliance issues. It's very expensive and it's hard to find a consumer base and so on. So there's no real easy answer here, but I do think if there is an answer, it has something to do with tapping into their economic self-interest, which was definitely hurt through this, what it turned out to be a major scandal. So that is good. Withdrawing your money, closing your account, these things do have an impact.
I find it hard to believe that PayPal didn't plan for people closing their accounts after releasing the updated terms of service. Well, that would be assuming that they meant for that to be in their terms of service, which we are assuming they did, I think, at this point, right? I mean, nobody buys that this was all just totally accidental.
Right.
What layer of conspiracy you're willing to go to, I guess, is that's where the customization is. But
I tend to think it was just a gigantic screw up that they didn't expect it, that they didn't expect anybody would even notice this. I mean, we live in times of censorship where, this is just the norm now. Mm-hmm. So I think they probably just put it out there and figured nobody was really going to read it. And I forget now who first reported it, the Daily Wire or something like that. I forget now who did it. I can't keep these websites straight. But then National Review, I first heard about it from National Review, then Epoch jumped into it, and then it just blew up. Mm-hmm. Because everybody knows now what misinformation is. My guess is they put it out there to codify their existing practices and didn't expect it to be particularly controversial.
Yeah, I think they thought that would fly right under the radar and people just wouldn't notice because they update that stuff all the time and usually it does fly under the radar. Mm-hmm. But I think they messed up. They used that word and I think everybody remembers the DHS Disinformation Governance Board fiasco and it's just like, no, we're not going to put up with this anymore. People have had enough. So you start talking about misinformation. We all know what that means. And I think that's something really that everybody should be concerned about, not just people that are, more right-leaning. I think everyone should be concerned about that. And everyone, I believe, is. So I think that more people were upset by that than maybe they thought would be. But as far as like building your own, the thing with that is, and they always say that, oh, if you don't like Twitter, just build your own Twitter. Okay, well, you can't build your own Google. Like no one's going to give me a joint CIA NSA research grant to create my own proprietary technology. I'm not going to get CIA In-Q-Tel venture capital. Like they are boosting these because they have unlimited money with their black budgets or however In-Q-Tel comes up with its venture capital and picking and choosing what companies to invest in. But look what happened with Parler, right? Someone did create an alternative and they all bandied together to destroy it. So when it's like, what can you do? There are alternatives out there. One of the new ones is Gab Pay. So Gab is like an alternative to Twitter that somehow survived. They all tried to destroy that also. But it has survived. They have Gab Pay, and there are a couple others out there. There is Align, Stripe. There's, Shing or Digital Telepresence. So there are people trying to make alternatives. They just have to kind of take on.
Isn't that one?
Buy Me a Coffee. Yes. They're out there. It's not the best technology. It may not be as convenient and as easy as PayPal, but it's our best shot, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to give a shout out to some of the people that are trying to challenge the hegemonic control that these people have over us,
And one worries too, and in a bigger sense, like as these alternatives become big, how do we know they're not going to succumb to the same sort of pressures?
Exactly.
All the rest of it, so are we really living in a world where every big technology just ultimately has to acquiesce to government priorities or expect to be stomped through some compliance harassment or whatever? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to live in that kind of world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you made a really good point earlier about how we often, those of us who are asking questions about all of this, often forget how many people there are who actually like it. And I think, that's one of the things that I try to talk a lot about when I'm discussing media, because that's my background. I'm a former TV reporter. And, we talk about pharmaceuticals, for instance. A lot of people think, well, you're funded by pharmaceuticals, so, you have to pimp for Pfizer or whatever. But no reporter I've ever heard in any editorial meeting is sitting there saying, I know the truth is this, but I'm going to say this because I know my salary depends on it. They're mostly bought in, they're true believers. And I think that's almost worse, because it would be, I think, an easier problem to fix if you have a lot of people who are like aware, oh, I know this is evil, but I just want to control people because I have this power thing that I'm dealing with. I just want to control the world. The harder thing is this sort of benevolent overlord, I think, where, we just forget there are just so many people who really feel like we need policies like this to keep people safe.
Well, that's right. Yeah, the New York Times is a good case in point of that, because, after 2016, the higher ups in the New York Times really tried to rebalance the newspaper to make it more fair. And they sent out notes of apology. Gee, we didn't realize that a lot of people didn't really want Hillary Clinton to be president. If we're going to try to report more fair on this guy. And what happened over the next year or two was that the employees themselves, at all levels of the newspaper, sort of rose up with their woke diplomas and said, nope, we're going to go fully propaganda. That's our goal. And anybody who disagrees is out. And sure enough, new editor of the editorial page of the New York Times was fired, right? So they got their way. So you're exactly right about that. We face not just an institutional problem, but a fundamental philosophical problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if you remember this. I bring up this article all the time. This was a New York Times article from 2016. And they basically say that because Trump poses a unique danger, we have to do journalism differently. And this is one of the moments I cite as the shift in what we're seeing now. Because when you can argue to people that there's a unique danger, then you can also argue a unique solution. The problem is then, like, there's just the next danger. And like, so COVID came after that, and they just keep selling dangers, but this was, they tell you their playbook here, which is why I think, like, I know what you're talking about, because then they hire Barry Weiss, right? And then she ends up quitting in this ball of fire where she's like, I can't do what they hired me to do. But in this article, they give away that they just have to do it. And most broadly, it upsets balance, that idealistic form of journalism with a capital J we've been trained to always strive for. Like, we just can't do it anymore.
Capital J, I like that. That's hilarious language. That's taken straight from literary deconstructionism and critical theory, and I believe in truth, small t, but not truth, big T. I don't know what it is with the people with the capital letters.
Yeah, that's big J. But see, yeah, I mean, they're just open about it here. Like, well, we just have to. I'm sorry, we can't do. Yeah, we can't even do big J anymore. We were screwing around with little J, but now we can't even do. Here, like, they're asking this question: how balanced do you have to be when one side is just irrational? So they're just like, you're just irrational. We have to do it differently. And so this was the same thing that happened with COVID. These people are just being irrational. We just have to do journalism. So it was out there. This is public. They're bragging about it in 2016.
Well, it's really terrifying, because it was the New York Times that drove the COVID response, by the way, all the way from February 27th going forward. They whipped up public hysteria and called for, going medieval on the virus. And it was the New York Times that was the main voice for lockdowns in the Western world. And that contradicted 100 years of calm, decent, public-spirited reporting on pandemics, whether it was 1968, 69, or 57, 58, or 1940 to 42 with the polio pandemic, or the 1929 parrot flu. They were always counseling calm, go see your doctor if you get sick, we'll get through this, we got this under control. Not in 2020. Suddenly they were the main generators of public frenzy and calling for lockdowns. They had a lot to do with the catastrophic response.
Okay, I think there was only one other question that I wanted to throw at Jeffrey before he goes. Somebody was asking about, like, why $2,500? Do either of you have a guess on why that number?
Oh, I don't know. It's hot. I don't know. I don't know. That's the PayPal tax. I don't.
It's so random, and most
Yeah.
people don't probably even have that kind of money in their account. Like, how are they going to enforce this? They were just, I don't know. There's so many questions. Like, what if you didn't have $2,500 already in your account? They couldn't just seize it. What are they going to do? Send you a letter? You owe them this. And then what if you don't pay? Then what? They're going to send who after you? Like, how are they?
It really does feel like a new sort of private sector tax. I mean, it's really chilling when you think about it. It's incredible. You use our service, and if you use it in ways we don't like, then we're going to charge you money. Is there any precedent for that? I'm not even sure.
I don't know. I mean, like we were talking about at the very beginning, the precedent is that they were actually already doing it. They just weren't saying that that's what they were doing.
Yeah,
so, I mean, because if you think about it, at the end of the day, like they did consider, of course, they don't tell people like Christina exactly what they did wrong, but it's highly likely that it's some kind of, some kind of misinformation sector of discipline they're working with her. Ryan, same way, and with The Last American Vagabond. And in both of those cases, they never gave you your balance back. So I mean, it depends on what money you had in there, but they were doing that. I guess if you want to look at it as a fine, or if you want to look at it as stealing, I guess that depends on what side you fall on. But I mean, they were already doing that. So
the courts are our best hope at this point. And, that's not a very good answer, but fortunately we do have many, many lawsuits that are just multiplying by the day, and many good federal judges that have come to conclusion that they really do need to act to protect fundamental rights and freedoms in this country. So that seems to be one hope that we have. And, I was never a fan of Trump, but I must say, his judicial appointments, have been very, very crucial to preserving rights and liberties. I shudder to think what would happen without that judge in Florida who ruled against the mask mandates and so on. It's been going on all over the country. So the judiciary is at least not entirely in bed with this agenda, at least not yet.
Jeffrey, where should I send people so they can follow you?
Oh, go to Brownstone and sign up for our emails. I only send one a week, and I like to collect email addresses because it's if things really come right down to it, we have to have our own networks of contacts. So that more than anything else, of course, I'm on all the usual social channels, but I don't know how long those are going to survive. But Brownstone, we're in pretty good shape. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for jumping on so last minute. I know I just wrote you and you were willing to chat. Yeah. So thanks. I hope you'll come back sometime.
I hope so. Please invite me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, Jeffrey.
Bye-bye.
And Christina, hang on, because I want to take a couple more questions for you. I think we're going to probably cut the YouTube stream, though. Everybody, if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to start talking Snowden and some national security stuff. Not necessarily to censor the conversation, just because, hey, we're talking about incentivizing getting off of crappy platforms. So if you're watching on YouTube, get off the crappy platform and go watch us live on Rumble or ROKFIN, or go to Locals and you'll get it later. Okay. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.